1 Kings chapter number 11, and we're going to be starting off in the first couple verses, but what we're looking at today is the kingdom of Israel being divided. Now, division is one of those things that can be good or bad depending on the context. Jesus Christ actually said in Luke 12:51, "Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth, I tell you, nay, but rather division." And there is the right kind of dividing. There is the right kind of separation. In fact, those of us that are saved, we are called saints. To be a saint means that we are sanctified. To be sanctified means to be set apart, which means there is a division. We are called to be a holy people, which means we must be separate from that which is unholy. And so there is the right kind of division. There is the right kind of separation. And we are to strive for that separation from the world, from the flesh, as we cling to God. But when we are in Christ, when we are close to God, we should be petrified of division with God. We should not want to ever be absent of His presence. We should want to be in sweet fellowship with Him at all times. And with that fellowship with God, there also comes fellowship with the believers. We should not strive for division, and we should not be satisfied with division with fellow saints, especially, in our homes. I don't want division in my home. The idea of division in my home is terrifying. When me and my wife are not on the same page and I've offended her and there's some separation between, I feel like everything else in the world is falling apart in that moment. Because if me and my wife aren't right, that is a central relationship. That division, it cannot be allowed to exist. Same thing with my little girls. If I feel like there's something that's between me and one of my daughters, it drives me nuts. I'll be honest, I can never try and preach or teach if I feel like there's separation in my home. Because if I'm not right with my family, how am I right with God? And so I have to go and get right with God, and then I go and get right with my family, and that allows me to come into the church and go and be right in order to minister and to be right with my church family. But there can't be division in a church either. And so we need to be constantly wary and looking out for divisions that can come between the brethren. Our memory verse is James chapter 1, verse number 5. The Bible says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him." Now, we're looking for wisdom, and if we're going to be looking for wisdom in this area of division, one of my favorite passages in the Bible is found in Proverbs chapter 22, verse number 3. The Bible says, "A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished." Now, I like to quote that verse whenever I see trouble coming up ahead. The wise man, he foreseeth the evil and he hideth himself. And so, some things are just traps. And you see it coming, you're like, nope, I don't go there. And you say, why don't you go there? Because that leads to trouble. And what we're going to be looking at today is this division, and we're going to be looking at some things that they're traps, that cause division. And so we're going to be looking at the example of Solomon and then his son Rehoboam to see examples of how to divide yourself from people. When the Bible talks about in Proverbs 22:3 being prudent, what prudent means is cunning in a positive sense, being aware of how your actions are going to affect in the future. Understanding the ramifications of the decisions of your behavior and, heavily guided by denying present desires to enable future successes. And so what are we looking for in life? Because when we make decisions, we're looking at, some kind of future gain. And I think what we should be looking at is trying to keep the unity of the brethren, trying to keep that family together. Now, this is very, very important. And so before we move forward, I want you to understand the right kind of unity. Unity is not just agreeing with whatever a person says and just doing what they want in order to keep the peace. That is not unity. Unity is found in Christ. And if we want unity, we need to go to where Christ is. So, in any kind of counseling between a divided party, if there's any kind of he said, she said, or he said, she said, whatever it may be, but when you have this division, oftentimes what will happen is it becomes this a clawing match to try and get the other person to understand the other. And trying to get people to their side of things, trying to get people to their point of view, and if only everyone agreed with me, we'd finally have unity. I don't know if you've noticed this, but that's what happens, politically. Now that my party is in control, we can finally have unity in this country, completely dismissive of, the other half of the population, whichever side wins. That's not unity. Unity is not just winning an argument. Unity can only be found in agreeing with God. We need the unity of the Spirit, not the spirit of unity. There's a difference. The spirit of unity that's going to be backsliding, that's going to be compromise. The unity of the Spirit is when we agree with God, who is always right, we finally get on the same page. And so something that we need to understand, especially with saints in conflict resolution, is not to determine who's right and who's wrong, because we already know who's right. That is God. It's just getting in line with what God says. And when we're both in line, when any two parties are in line with what God is doing, we will be unified, not because of each other, but because of Jesus Christ and because of God. It's when we get our own way and we focus on our own way that division starts to take root, when those cracks start to form in a relationship. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 through 2, we see Solomon, and we're going to see the kingdom rent from him. Okay, so what happened? Why did Solomon lose the kingdom? And let's just talk about, who Solomon is. Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived. If anyone knew how to behave themselves, it was Solomon. Okay? Solomon had also proven that through his reign. He had in great peace. He knew how to get along with those that were around him. Not only did he have great peace, but huge industrious building projects. The temple was made, and we're going to be looking at some other building projects that shouldn't be done. But he knew how to work with people. They were massively wealthy. It was the golden age of this kingdom. And so Solomon, he knew what he was doing. How did he lose it though? Because he did. He had everything going for him. He had everything in his corner, and yet he lost it all. And we start seeing that fall in verse number 1. The Bible says, "But King Solomon loved many strange women." Jumping down to the second verse, "Of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love." All right, step one, and if you want division in your life, okay, if you're looking like, I really need some more chaos, I really need some more heartache, I really want to have, my soul shattered into 1,000 pieces and to lose so much of what my life is built up, here's what you need to do, okay? In order to get division, first, you need to have divided affections, okay? The more you can divide your affections, the better. And especially, you need to get it off of God. The Bible tells multiple times not to intermarry with these outside religious groups. Why? Because they will take the heart. So, as we love God, we agree with God. This is what happens. We agree with his doctrine. We agree with his motives. We agree with his behaviors. We agree with everything. So, the devil works very hard to get our heart set on something outside of that, something away from God. That will bring in conflicts, warring, and fighting, according to James, because of the lust that we have. This is why the warring comes in. This is why the fighting comes in. And so he tries to capture our heart. You'll notice, even as the world constantly works to try and divide our attention, to drive our affection, that it's always looking for giving us something else and something new to love away from God, to pull us away from God. If they can just get our hearts somewhere else. This is why God warned long ago not to go and love after those things that are not followers of God, because it divides us. It takes us away from him. It turns away the heart. And the devil knows this as well, and so works overtime to infatuate us. And so Solomon, he loved many strange women. Now, we look at the word strange, and I want you to understand that means foreign. They were all different. And so the more strange women that he loved, the more that he went after, the more his heart became divided. And so that internal division was taking place. And his heart must have been divided. Imagine, you look at the numbers that he had in verses 3 and 4, and he had 700 wives. How in the world does your heart not, divide when you have 700 wives? And it wasn't enough. And 300 concubines. And his wife turned away his heart. For it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. That word perfect, it means complete. It's whole. It's dedicated. His heart was no longer perfect with God. Why? Because it was divided 1,000 different ways with all these different women who were going after their own things. And so he was split into 1,000 different directions all at the same time. He no longer had time for God because he was chasing after those other affections. But notice this. He also devalued all of those women. He did. You can't look at it and say, no, he had a really loving relationship and he was really dedicated to each one of those 700 wives, which is why he got 300 extra concubines on top of it. He wasn't dedicated. He was completely 100% divided. And in the multiplication of those wives, he was devaluing each one. He was reducing them to what? A number. You know, I've honestly tried to think about this. There's different psychology reports and stuff like that that say you can actually only memorize up to about 400 people's names. And so Solomon, as wise as he is, we'll give him some extra grace. Did he remember the names of all of his wives and all of his concubines? I mean, he averaged 3 anniversaries a day. What does it even mean anymore? I mean, every day there's like 3 different people on average, and, you know, maybe there was some weddings, you know, some days that he had, 34 anniversaries that day, and there was other days where maybe he never got married on a Sabbath, let's just say, because that's a day of rest. Don't get married on a Sabbath. So now you're taking out, that's going to be another 48 days out. Now you're averaging 4 anniversaries a day. That's nuts. There's no value in it anymore. The anniversary doesn't mean anything. It becomes empty. And so here's this key component of a relationship, and it's gone. If he could even remember their name, he'd be running back and forth with all these different wives. But we know he wasn't doing that because he was busy doing other things. And so he just had this giant palace and all these different houses and all these different places where he put these women away, and you stay there. And if I remember you, I'll come visit you. But, chances are I'll just be walking down the street, find somebody new. I'll just add them. It's a terrible way of living. Completely devaluing human life. And this is what, again, will cause division. First, what you have to do in order to have division is you have to have a love outside of God, and you increase that love. And you can have as many loves as you want to. The devil does not care. You can have 14 different loves for all the devil cares. Okay? And so you don't have to chase after one thing. Chase after 40. Chase after 1,000. It doesn't matter to him. And then what you have to do is you have to devalue human life. Because he was devaluing them. He was willing to take them for himself and, kind of ruin their future. They were never going to have a normal, stable home. It was gone. But he didn't care because, they were for Solomon. And I'm sure there may have been some other justifications. There may have been some reasons for taking some of these women, for political engagements and stuff like that. And, this will help solidify the kingdom. But they did not have 700 nations surrounding them. There weren't that many. We see one princess of Egypt. We see a couple that, they were bringing in these abominations from these other nations. So we can assume they were from the outside. But it really wasn't about that. It was about Solomon. It was always about Solomon. And he continually built himself up and just saw people as tools to be used for his own personal gain, for his own personal pleasure. And that will bring division. If you're selfish, you will bring division into your home. You will take from others. You will devalue them. But also understand with what measure you meet, it'll be measured to you again. You become devalued as well. And the more you devalue people, and it can be in any other number of different ways, whether it be in pornography, whether it be in premarital sex, whether it be in racism, abortion, divorce, whatever it may be, however you feel that, those people are for your desire, they're for your comfort, they're for you and you alone, okay, you are bringing more division in. Because you'll devalue them, you'll get rid of them if you don't want them. Okay, there'll be something that, just a little notch in the belt or whatever it may be, and you'll feel the exact same way because as you treat others, that's how you'll be treated. You devalue people, and you'll feel devalued. I don't think it's any kind of, wonder that Solomon wrote a book that may be the most depressing in the Bible. He's vanity of vanities, all his vanities. Why? Because he felt so empty. Here's a guy that wrote Song of Solomon, a beautiful book talking about, the wonders of romantic marriage, and then he went and did this with 699 extra women, plus another 300 on top just in case, completely destroying it. No wonder he was depressed. I'd be depressed too. It's a mess. He brought division into his life. Why? Because he allowed that division to take place in his heart, and then it started affecting the people around him. Verses 5 and 6. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. So again, in order to have division, you must first leave God as your first love, and then love something else more. Then you need to devalue people in order to receive the new love that you have, where they are just stepping stones to get that new love. Thirdly and finally, you must devalue God as he no longer fits in your vision, and since you don't value his creation and those made in his image, that will also reflect toward him as well. And so with him devalued, you will follow after new gods that will give in to your heart's desires. You'll find something else to worship. And so Solomon, he started worshiping after these abominations. And the devil is just fine, by the way, with you worshiping multiple gods. He's all about diversifying your portfolio of different loves. Because again, he's coming to seek and to destroy and to kill and to maim. And he does that by seeking those that are on the outskirts, whose loyalties are divided, whose affections are divided. Because when we're divided, we're weak. We're sheep. Sheep do not do very well by themselves. We are not meant to go solo. Okay? It's unnatural, if I can put it that way. The devil knows as long as we stay close to God, we're untouchable. He can't do anything about it. You know, the Bible tells us to draw close to God and the devil will flee from you. So the only way that he can get, close to you is by getting you to turn away from God, to stop loving God, to love something else, to go and turn your eyes and turn your affections away and draw you. He is a master of temptation. And that temptation bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. That's the plan. And so he gets us to turn our eyes away from God, to bring that division in, to get us separate from everyone else. And again, he does not care what you love outside of God. As long as it isn't God, he doesn't care. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 7 through 8. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. Now, with the new portfolio of love, okay, when you diversify your assets of love, you're going to start diversifying your investments as well. You start making investments in those things that you love. And so Solomon, with all of his wealth, this is what he did. He built high places. He built temples to these strange gods. Here is Solomon, the guy that God had chosen by hand, that was ordained of God to build his temple, one of the wonders of the world at that time, completely beautiful, magnificent. And God, it was amazing. The ordination service, if you will, for that building. We see the glory of God inhabiting it, so much so that the priests could not approach. We see the fire of God coming and eating up those sacrifices. It was absolutely amazing. I don't believe that there was any such thing for any of these abominations that were made, and yet he kept making them. I don't think when, he built this altar to Chemosh that anything spectacular happened. I don't think when he did this abomination of Molech that there was any kind of sign or fire from heaven. And when you study what these things were, these aren't just places like, okay, you can just have your little thing right here. He set them right before the hill that's in Jerusalem, the hill that the temple was built on. Before the hill. Before you even got to God's place of worship, you went by this abomination. And if you do some study and you find out, okay, well, what does the worship of Chemosh look like? It's human sacrifice. How did Solomon get to this point where he was willing to make this human sacrifice as part of the rituals concerning this worship? Simple. He turned away from the love of God. He loved himself. He devalued people, and he devalued God. And so what's wrong with sacrificing people? They had been devalued to that point where he was willing to build an altar and he was willing to make the investment in order to make it more conducive for better sacrifice. The abomination of Molech, that's the one where they burn the babies alive. And you wonder, how, Solomon? How did you get to this point? Why? Because his heart was so divided, it was so devalued, his love of God was so devalued, his love of people was so devalued that, I'll just do it because it makes my wife happy and that makes me happy and because I don't want to hear whatever it is and, they're sad. So we'll just build altars for them, we'll just do it, whatever, it doesn't matter anyway. There's more people. There's more wives. It's wicked. And so we see what this division can do to someone like Solomon. And no matter what great deeds were done prior, Solomon's temple still stood, but that didn't make it okay. You say, well, Solomon's temple, that was at the very top, and all these other ones, they're in the valley, they're at the forefront, they're in these other places. They don't have that primo spot. And so, God's place, that's still number one, but there's still 999 other places. God was not pleased with this, and God does not coexist with these things. God is not okay with this, relationship where, there's a timeshare for Solomon. This is why God said that he didn't go fully after him. Maybe there was still a part that went after him. Maybe they still held the new moons and they still had the feasts and they still did those rituals and stuff, but all the other rituals and stuff as well. Why not both? And the answer is very simple. Because it brings division. That's why not both. We need to go holy after God and to be a holy people. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 9 through 10, and the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord commanded. There was no excuse for this idolatry. There was no reason for Solomon to chase after these things. And we've already talked about how, he saw the fire of God come down from heaven. He saw the very presence, the Shekinah glory of God fill that temple to the point the priest could not enter. Not only that, but God had appeared to him not once, but twice. And in those two appearances, he received incredible wisdom, peerless wisdom. He knew better. And God told him specifically not to do this. Yet he did it anyway. He was without excuse. Now, God had blessed him above any other king of Israel prior or even moving forward. He had great wealth, he had great peace, he had great everything. Solomon had been blessed by God to such a great extent, and yet it just was not enough. He had to have more. His heart became divided, and his kingdom would become divided as a result of it. Now, we look at Solomon and we say, how in the world is this possible? But I also have to look in the mirror. It's amazing the things that God has done for me. Absolutely incredible, starting with, first and foremost, salvation. I have met with God. God has done an incredible work in my life. Continuing forward with that, I've also been called into ministry. I'm a preacher. I'm a pastor. God has called me, and he's spoken to me, and he's directed me, and he has guided me, and he has given me such wonderful things, a beautiful family. He's given me peace. He's given me, I'm going to be honest, a ministry that I absolutely love. I adore it. It's wonderful. God has been so good to me. He has given me more than my heart could ever have asked for, and yet sometimes I find myself divided. And it can be the most foolish things. I'm going to use an example, okay? And I'm stepping on my toes first. Hey, but today, we're having an early service during Vikings kickoff. New season. It concerns me that my thoughts might wander to that during the preaching of God's Word. How? Why? Something so foolish can capture my attention from something that is so incredibly powerful, and yet it does. That's how prone to wander my wicked heart is. That's how prone to division my heart is, where it can divide my attention over a piece of leather crossing a white line. It's foolish. And so we need to be very careful looking at Solomon and saying, I would never do that. Yeah, I would. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. We need to be careful of that division. We need to make sure that we keep God at the forefront. That's where he belongs, where he has the temple of my heart. It is his temple. It is not to be divided with different wings to different idols. And, God, he has the place of, the preeminence along with all these other false gods. No. He deserves not only my best, but my all. He bought me entirely, wholly. He should get all of me. There is no room for division. Continuing on in verses 11 through 12, wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, for as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. Notwithstanding in thy days, I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. Solomon had sown division, and he would reap division. It had started internally, it had spread externally, and it was going to continue to have ramifications. And now I want to give a warning to parents in particular in here. Many of you have children over in the West Wing. If you have divided affections now, your children will also have divided affections. They are going to see what mom and dad love, and your children are like you. They are not you, but they are like you. And they will pick up that divided affection. And if they don't see God as being the priority in your life, why should he be in theirs? If they don't see how real God is in your life, What's the difference between any other abomination? And I think Solomon with the 700 wives, we don't know how many children we have, but we do know of one by the name of Rehoboam. What did he think of God watching his dad do this? Why in the world would Rehoboam think that, the worship of the one true God, was any more important than the worship of Chemosh and Molech and all these other different things, and just, suit whatever is your fancy, pick the flavor of the day. You can jump back and forth to whatever your current need is, and you don't have to be dedicated to the Lord. Why? Rehoboam was set up for failure because of Solomon. Because of that divided affection, because of that divided heart, it had an effect on the next generation. It had an effect on the entire kingdom because he was the testimony. He was the guy that the nation would look to. And what did they see? Someone that was completely disinterested in the things of God. Didn't suit his purpose, didn't suit his need. In a minute we're going to be looking at when the children of Israel come and they confront Rehoboam. And they say, we want you to ease up, okay? We want you to ease up on the workload. It's been a little too much. You know what's really, really just terrible to look at, though? There was no calling out saying, hey, your dad really started going into the idolatry. We need to get back to the worship of the one true God. It's not what they were interested in. They didn't care about that one bit. And so when the nation's divided, and Jeroboam goes up to the north, and he creates this golden calf and says, hey, Israel, the 10 tribes that left, why don't you fall down and worship to this? They're like, okay, yeah, that's fine. Why? Because that's all that they had known at that point nationally. They come into Jerusalem and they're going to worship before God. There were 3 times in a year that they were required to appear before God and to worship God, and yet when they came in, what did they see first thing? The abomination of Molech. They had to walk by the altar to Chemosh. They had to go by all these different high places with all these different altars, and so what's the difference? That's your God, that's your God, that's your God. Which one's my God? Forgetting who the one true God is. Just find the one that best suits you. And what we find is if we're looking selfishly and we're looking for what is going to best fit me and do what I want, what we're looking for is whatever bobblehead is just going to agree with whatever else we is that we already wanted, and we'll do that. And that is not the one true God, and so we end up in idolatry because we don't love him. We love us. Every time we love us, we end up in idolatry. We need to learn to love God. Continuing on, 1 Kings chapter 11, jumping ahead to verse 34, howbeit I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him prince all the days of his life for David my servant's sake, whom I chose, because he kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand, and will give it unto thee, even 10 tribes. Now, this actually was given to Jeroboam, this promise here. 10 tribes are going to be given to Jeroboam, this northern kingdom that we're going to be looking at in a couple minutes here. But we see that there is still hope. There is still a remnant. And so I want to say, Mom and Dad, don't set up your kids for failure, okay, by having multiple loves and confusing your children and causing chaos in the home and that, division that will take place not following singularly after God, but also understand there is still hope. God is still good. God still has the opportunity to reach into the lives of those kids and make a difference. It's not all gone. And I don't want anyone leaving here today thinking, that's it, I messed up, I did the worst, and it's over. Solomon was wicked, without excuse. His son Rehoboam was also foolish, but there was still hope. And God still used Rehoboam. And you see the nation continue with Rehoboam in Judah. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 41 through 42, and the rest of the acts of Solomon and all that he did and his wisdom, are they not written in the books of the acts of Solomon? And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And so here we see the end of Solomon, and it's just something kind of interesting. I haven't studied it too much, but it's just one of those kind of, things in the Bible you go, hey, and maybe you pick it up later on. But King Saul reigned for 40 years. King David reigned for 40 years. And King Solomon reigned for 40 years. Each of those first 3 kings over the united nation of Israel was for 40 years each. But it was only 120 years from the time of the beginning of the setting up of the kingdom of Israel to the time of its division. Very short. And the division came right after this golden age for the nation, which kicked off so well with splendor, with majesty, with the temple being built, and this was a permanent place, and everything was going to be settled, and it's going to be established, and God is with us. And within the space of 40 years, they started chasing after other gods. The kingdom was divided. And how quickly things can change. how quickly it can go away, the love of God and the division that can take root. 1 Kings chapter 12, picking up with Rehoboam, that they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam, saying, Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father, and his heavy yoke which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee. Now we've been studying the separation between us and God, okay? And it causes a separation, with other people as well, because again, our primary relationship that we have is with God. If I'm not right with God, I will not be right with my wife. I will not be right with my children. I will not be right with church members. If I'm not right with God, I can't be right with anybody else. And so that's the initial separation. But then we have separation that can come in between people. And so how does this separation take place? And Rehoboam, these things are written for our learning. Rehoboam shows us exactly how to cause division between people, how to separate people. We're going to study them. They come to him and they're asking for something. They say, look, we've been working hard. And Solomon, he was all about his wealth. He was very industrious. He was all these building projects and stuff like that. And apparently, he'd been riding the people pretty hard. He'd been making them work very, very difficult in order to increase the majesty of his glory, increase the majesty of his kingdom. Because Solomon was selfish, they were the ones that were paying for it. And so they come to him, and here's Rehoboam, the new guy, and they're going to come and they're going to make this initial request. And so this is Rehoboam's first taste, if you will, of being the king. We see this in verse 5, and he said unto them, Depart yet for 3 days, then come again to me. And the people departed. And King Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, How do ye advise that I may answer this people? Now, Rehoboam actually starts off very wisely. Okay? And you say, well, how so? He didn't just shoot from the hip, okay, and answer emotionally. He's like, all right, this is a big decision. Okay? This is kind of a major deal, and so we need to make the right decision. So let's get away from it for a couple days. Give me 3 days. I'm going to consult. Okay? Then he goes and he finds these men that stood before Solomon his father. Solomon, wisest man there was, okay, would probably have rubbed off on these guys over the last 40 years. And so here he has an opportunity to kind of pick their brains, find out what do you think. And so he gets this safety in this multitude of counselors. And they spake unto him, saying, If thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever. But he forsook the counsel of the old men which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, and which stood before him. Now, notice what the counsel was. Okay? Be a servant for today. Minister today. Speak kindly today, and you'll have them forever. And it was wise counsel. I don't like the motives in it. I'm just going to be honest. The point of having a king was he was supposed to be a minister to the people. He was supposed to serve the people in that role. That office was meant for service. And so the end goal, honestly, was not good. It was selfish. But today, just for a moment, humble yourself. Just for a moment, submit yourselves to this people. Just for a moment, make it easier on them, and you will win them over, and they will accept you. Rehoboam said no. He couldn't fathom, even for a moment, even for a day, even for this one conversation, the idea of being in subjection to those people. They were his subjects. Don't you know? You're here to minister to me. You're here to serve me. I'm the king. Okay? You serve me. I don't serve you. And so here we see, if you want to cause division between people, always keep your own self-interest number one priority. And never be willing to back off of what's going to be best for you, even for a moment. Make sure that you always stand your ground on what you want. Don't consider other people. And he already had wealth, by the way. He already had it. It's not like, when all of a sudden Solomon turned the keys over to Rehoboam that, the shields of gold, the 400 of them that were in front of the temple were just gone. It wasn't like, all those building projects and all the majesty of the kingdom just instantly disappeared. The Bible talks about how he made silver to be as stones in Jerusalem. It's not like everyone got rid of all their stones. All he had to do was lighten up. But he would not, because he was in control. He was in authority. It had to be his way, not their way. Far be it to ever, back down off of having your own way. You ever get into trouble because you just had to have your way? I have, regularly. Rather than ministering, I demand being ministered to. Causes division. Causes separation. Have to have it my way. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 10 through 11. And the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, Thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, Thy father made our yoke heavy, but make thou it lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. And now whereas my father did lade you with the heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. So he went to his young men, the ones that grew up with them. Okay? Now, just imagine for a second the relationship dynamic that Rehoboam probably had with these young men. They grew up with him. They were his quote-unquote friends. Now, Solomon was the king. He got the authority. He got the respect. He was one that was marveled after. Queen of Sheba comes and talks about how great he is. And so, Solomon is a big deal. He's a son of David, incredibly wise, incredibly wealthy. And here's Rehoboam, the next in line to be king. We need some companions for him. So they get these companions, and how are these companions going to treat Rehoboam? Well, I'll just be honest, they're going to be sycophants. They're not going to be honest with him. They're going to be yes men. Because he has the control, he has the money, he has the power, and so it become this game of trying to get into Rehoboam's good favor so that later on you can have the best position. So you're just going to tell Rehoboam whatever it is that he wants, and you're going to grow up, basically being surrounded by these guys. If you're Rehoboam, being surrounded by these guys that exist to answer to your every whim, and you can treat them however you want to, and they're not going to say a peep because that means their own loss, and so you're going to have a completely selfish behavior all the way through, and that's what Rehoboam is going to look at as everyone else around him. How dare you challenge me? Do you know who I am? No, no. I don't ease up on you, okay? I'm going to teach you who's boss. And so he becomes harder. And with division, I'm just letting you know, any kind of division, you will always find somebody telling you, yes, divide further. Yep, that's the right thing to do. You need more division. Hold it against them. Never practice forgiveness. Don't practice kindness. You need to be harsh. Okay, you need to bring the hammer down on them. That's what you got to do. You will always find those people. Be no lack of it. But it doesn't bring peace. It doesn't. It just brings further division. Is that our goal? To bring that further division? 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 13 through 14. And the king answered the people roughly, and forsook the old men's counsel that they gave him, and spake to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. So Rehoboam went with the tough guy act. You know what that showed, though? He was extremely insecure. You say, what do you mean? Hey, everything was being compared to his dad, the majesty of dad's kingdom, and he had to be like dad, and dad was the greatest, and dad had all this stuff, and I have to have this stuff. And so the relationship with God did not matter to him. It was the stuff. The stuff that Solomon lived for. The stuff that Solomon had drove these people into, these states trying to get. Well, Rehoboam had to have more than dad. He had to be better than dad. He had to fill those great big shoes. And so he had to drive those people harder. And so he created this division. He threatened his kingdom without realizing that he was losing the kingdom in doing so. He was making it weaker. We see their reaction in verse 16. So when all Israel saw the king hearken not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, What portion have we in David? Neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed unto their tents. Now, Israel was apparently completely caught off guard by his response. They did not think he was going to answer this way. It is kind of interesting. Rehoboam at this point didn't really do anything. Solomon had kind of kept him hidden in the corner, I think. So they didn't know what to expect from him. And so when they finally met him, they found an insecure little boy that, had to be in control, that had to have his way. They found this tyrant, and they said, why exactly do we need you in the first place? We got a king. If you look back 120 years prior, when we first got a king, it was someone who's going to fight our battles for us. It was someone who was going to judge us. This guy has no judgment ability whatsoever. This is poor judgment. Why do we need you? You're not going to fight for us. You're trying to fight against us. If you said, we're going to take those Moabites and we're going to chastise them with scorpions, maybe we can get on board, but why me? Why my family? Why are you lashing out like this? And if this is how you're going to treat people, you take care of your own house. I want no part of it. So they left him. They brought the division. And just going to be honest, being cruel with your words, being mean, being accusatory, being threatening, really good way to push people away from you. It's not very attractive. I have yet to find someone who's like, hey, that guy's threatening me. I'm going to go be his friend. It just doesn't happen. It brings division. We need kindness. We need love. People are desperate for love, and if we would love them, we'd find that they're very much attracted, but no one needs more hate. No one's looking for it. There's plenty of that going around, and we do our best to avoid it. And so if we're going to be hateful towards people, we will be avoided by people. They will leave. And so here we see the people, they left him. Rehoboam was completely oblivious. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was over the tribute, and all Israel stoned him with stones that he died. Therefore King Rehoboam made speed to get him up to his chariot to flee Jerusalem. So Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. So here comes a piece de resistance, of Rehoboam's career up to this point. After this conversation saying, no, I'm going to be harder on you. And they say, well, says who? They go back home. We want nothing to do with you, so you see to your own house. You can be king in your little palace over there. Leave us alone. He sends a tax collector to go and get their taxes. Can you imagine how that went? Here they go and they say, can you ease up on us? He says, absolutely not. I'm going to make it worse. And then they leave saying, you see to your own house. I'm guessing that Rehoboam was not probably happy. He was probably, pretty upset, and he probably went and like, okay, well, I'm going to go get my taxes now. So I'm going to send my tax collector, and you are going to pay or else. And they stoned the tax collector with stones. And he died. You can't just pretend like nothing ever happened and you're just going to continue going on and everything's okay after you lash out at people and you've hurt people and you've offended people, but forget that because it's time for me to get my taxes. If you want to cause division, real division, offend people and then pretend like nothing happened and keep trying to use them. And they will despise you. You're going to pretend like the hurt never happened? Like you never caused this pain? You're not going to address this. You're going to come for, and just keep asking me for more after you've treated us this way in the past. And this was the tipping point. Now, should they stone him with stones? No. It was an evil. But evil begets evil. Wrath begets wrath. The forcing of wrath brings forth blood. And blood was brought forth. And now there was this chasm of division. This evil caused this division that there was no walking back from this. You know what? I'm sorry. My bad, guys. I went too far. No, someone had died over this now. They had reached a point of no return, and they lost the kingdom. And it came to pass, when all Israel heard that Jeroboam was come again, that they sent and called him unto the congregation, and made him king over all Israel. There was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. And so we see the division of the kingdoms. And as we move forward, we're going to have to start identifying those kingdoms. We see Israel and Judah. And so moving forward, when you see the nation of Israel, we're talking about the northern kingdom, sometimes referred to as Samaria later on. And then you have the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom. Okay? And so this is roughly the division. I'll just let you know, Simeon at this point was kind of absorbed into Judah. And so those are the two tribes that stayed in Judah. And then you have the northern tribes. So that's your Gad, Manasseh, Ephraim. All those guys, they all went north. Levi doesn't really count because they were spread all the way through. They didn't really have their own place. Okay? But you have these two divisions. And so moving forward, we're going to be comparing two monarchies, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Israel and Judah. And so it's something to keep in mind as we move forward to keep this division in mind. One day, though, that division is going to be done with. The millennial kingdom. And Jesus Christ himself will finally sit on the throne of David and rule over it. And we look forward to that time of unity. If I can just encourage us as Christians, we should be looking forward to unity in the future with God, but also presently. The Bible tells us, I'm going to skip ahead of a couple passages, in Ephesians chapter 4:3, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Why? Because Psalms 133 verse number 1 says, behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It's a wonderful thing to be unified. And as a church, we ought to strive to be unified, to love one another, to be forgiving one another, to be kind to one another, and not seek that division, but if you sense division, to try and make things right. Maybe I need to apologize. Apologize. Get right. Win your brother. Why? So that you can walk together. How can two walk together except they be agreed that God is right and I want to follow after him? And if we all follow after Christ, doing those things he commanded us to walk in the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, we'll be unified. And what a beautiful unity we can enjoy. Let's close with the word of prayer.